gets going, I want to warn you, even if you do not have a camera that takes pictures in Camera Raw, pay attention to what she's showing you, because after she's done, I'm going to show you a trick that will let anybody, whether they have a camera that shoots in RAW or not, use the special tools Cindy's going to show you now. Okay, Cindy, all yours.
All right, thank you. Well, before I show you Camera Raw, we got a little bit sidetracked there on the losing the audio. And I forgot to answer one of our students' questions. Mildred asked, once you get your camera's pictures transferred into the organizer, what if you have other pictures inside of your computer that you want to put into this organizer? So before I show you Camera Raw, I'm going to show you really quickly how to bring other pictures into the organizer so you can sort and take advantage of the different tagging that you can do inside of the organizer. So it's a pretty simple command. What you do is you open up your organizer, and you'll see that there is a file drop-down menu. And if you drop that down, it says Get Photos and Videos. It's the top command. And the first one is From Camera or Card Reader. Now, you probably are never going to have to use that, but if for some reason you attach your camera to the computer and turn it on and that pop-up box doesn't come on, all is not lost. You can come in and retrieve that information from the camera here by using this command, From the Camera or Card Reader. But the one I wanted to show you is this one, From Files and Folders. It's about halfway down. And I just click on that, and now it'll naturally default into My Pictures, because that's where most everybody keeps all their picture files. But if it doesn't, you just can, find where it is that you're storing your pictures in My Documents, where on your computer by going through this tree. So I'm going to My Pictures here, and now I can select, all of these folders if I want to, or I can select them individually. So I would just grab one and highlight it, and then I click on Get Photos, and that will transfer it over into the organizer. Now it sorts these by date, so once I go back to the All Edit, I'll have to go to the date it was created to find it. So here it is, and it just shows the ones that I have just transferred over. If I want to go back to all photos, I can just click on the back button, and it will bring me to all of my photos, and there it is. So that is how you bring in pictures that you don't already have in the organizer. You can bring them in. That said, let's go on to my next demo, and it is one of the reasons one of the things I have so much fun with, Camera Raw. But to understand Camera Raw, I want to take a second and explain to you what it is. With most cameras, most of your point-and-shoot cameras, the camera shoots in a format called JPEG. And there's nothing wrong with JPEG. It is a universally usable file. All computers can read it, and it compresses the file so that you can share it online. It also, when your camera shoots in JPEG, your camera puts some filters in filters the image a little bit. So if your color is wrong, your camera, when you press down on the shutter button, it reads the color of the light, and it says, oh, we have to correct that light. However, when we get into professional photography, or even serious shutterbugs, they like to be able to interpret their photographs, is the best way to put it. They want to render the final photograph or picture the way they remembered it in their mind, or maybe manipulate it a little bit so it's even better than they remembered it. And if the camera is making all the corrections, they don't have any control over that. So what Camera Raw does is when a photographer sets their camera to this setting, it's called RAW, it does not try to make any of those kind of color corrections. It leaves it all up to the photographer to do it later in photo editing software. So naturally, whenever I go out photographing, I shoot in Camera Raw because I want to, unless I'm doing an eBay photo that I just want to put up really quickly, I want to have a little bit more control over my photographs. So these photos that you're seeing here are all shot in Camera Raw. And now I'm going to show you kind of what you can do using Camera Raw processing. So I'm going to click on my one of these little pictures of the little Tin Man in the snow. And I'm going to show you Camera Raw. Some of these commands are hard to explain, but visually they're easier to understand if I just show you instead of try to explain it to you. So I'm going to show you several different examples of these processing photos in Camera Raw. So let's start with this Tin Man. He's actually a fairly good exposure. The color looks pretty good. So I'm going to go, I've clicked on him, he's highlighted. I'm going up to my editor and I'm going to choose Full Edit. In a minute it'll draw my screen. All right, so here is the Camera Raw editor. It's this gray box here. And the first thing you may recognize is this thing up here. It is our histogram. And if you remember from last week, this tells you how well an exposure your photograph is. This indicates, by reading this histogram here, I can see that a lot of my color values are on the dark end, even though it's a snowy picture. I can see that it's on the dark end. There's not a whole lot of, there's a valley here in our mid-tones, and then we have a peak, and then over here on our light side, we've got practically nothing, which tells me, by looking at this histogram, that this photograph is slightly underexposed. And that is very, very typical when you go out shooting in the snow. If you go out, I should say photographing in the snow, your camera will overcompensate for that, all that light. It's going to try to make it a little bit more gray. It's just doing what it's, doing its thing. But we've got a slightly muddy photograph here. So now I can kind of fix it up. The first thing you'll notice here is the temperature. And that is the color, off? Is the color too blue, or is it too yellow? I can manipulate that by sliding this bar up and cooling it down. You see, the color temperature essentially is getting bluer. Or I can, move it up here. Maybe I remember when I was taking this photograph, it was actually getting close to dusk, and the sun was just starting to pop out from the clouds. So it was a little bit warmer. I know that there was some of those sunset colors, so maybe I want a little bit warmer. And then I can choose the tint as well, and I can make it more reddish or more towards the greenish end. And again, now we are getting into a subjective part where we're using our judgment, remembering where we were and the quality of light. So there is no real right or wrong. The only real right or wrong is if it really looks, unnatural. The next thing is exposure. Remember now that I've got this this histogram that tells me that this is underexposed. So I can grab this slider bar and watch the histogram, try to watch the histogram as well as the picture as I slide this bar up and change its exposure. Now I'm bringing out some detail in the little rusty man. That's a lot better. Now recovery, We probably don't need to recover a lot of detail from this because this is a pretty good exposure. And I'll show you more about recovery in another shot here. So hang in there with me. So fill light is how much of this area do we want to show, this darker area. That's what fill light controls. So if I start bringing that up, if you notice that I'm starting to get more detail in here and more detail in the dark trees in the background. I'm filling in what's called the fill light. You know, I probably want a little bit, but not a whole lot. And blacks, it sort of does what what it says it does. The black shades, or the real dark shades, it brings those up so that we have real good punch or real good contrast in the photograph. So let me slide this bar up, and you can see now we are getting some real dimension in the little tin guy. You don't have to do very much to really affect this photograph. And brightness, it really does. It changes the brightness of the photograph or the darkness of the photograph. You may wonder what's the difference between the exposure and the brightness. They do kind of work in synchronicity with each other, but they are slightly different. Contrast, you know, I kind of like how this is looking, but maybe I want to punch it up some more. You know, just drag this up, and now you can see darker darks and lighter lights. Or, you know, maybe it's just too contrasty. If you were doing a portrait of a family, you don't want it to be really contrasty and punchy. It's better to have it a little bit on the flat side, so there's kind of an even tone throughout the whole photograph, not anything really edgy. You want to calm people when they're looking at photographs of people. So this contrast, again, it is, again, a very subjective kind of thing. Clarity and vibrance, this is how vivid or bright you want these, you know, that rough to show up. If I slide this vibrance up, you can see it really, really looks rusty. As we, you know, bring it down, it's not quite so vibrant. And the saturation, this is how much color do you want? Do you want it to be like really, really saturated with color, a really deep color? Or, you know, perhaps with this Tin Man, when I think of a Tin Man, I kind of think of the Wizard of Oz. And when I think of the Wizard of Oz, even when I think of the colorized version of the Wizard of Oz, there's still a lot of black in that photograph, a lot of gray, black and white. So maybe I want this Tin Man to kind of remind people a little bit about that Wizard of Oz. And if I bring the saturation down, you know, I'm starting to lose color, and I'm getting closer to a black and white image. And you know, if I go all the way down, we are taking all the color saturation out, and we do have a black and white photograph. One last thing I want to say here on this photograph, and I will move on to another one so you can see some of the other controls, is this histogram, when a professional photographer and when you are thinking about printing a photograph, becomes pretty important, especially with the whites. Because if you have whites that are so white that there is no detail, it's referred to as blown out. And when it gets printed on a piece of paper, where that area that's so white that there's no detail and it is blown out, where there is that kind of problem, the emulsion doesn't get exposed, that piece of paper doesn't get exposed, and the bottom line, what happens is that you get this picture back from the photo processor that has these kind of pinkish, muddy tones to it because there was no color information to put there. So you're just essentially seeing a piece of paper, a piece of photo paper, because there's nothing else to put there. So photographers and you, when you're thinking about printing your photos, should pay very, very close attention to areas that are blown out. And one way you can do that with Camera Raw is there is this little clipping. It's called the Highlight Clipping Warning Tool. It's right up here in the corner of your histogram. If I click on that, now you'll notice I've got some red areas here. You see these red little patches of red right here? It's telling me that if I decide that this is a good photograph and I go to send it to print, I have some areas where there is no color information. So what I want to do now, and I'm not going to have to do very much, is I want to recover those areas. So I'm going to slide my bar up a little bit, and as I start sliding, watch as those little red parts start disappearing. So now I have a better chance of getting a nice, good, clean photograph if I go to print it. So this is a fairly good exposure, no really wild color on it. So I just wanted to show you that. And now I'm going to go to another extreme case. Well, no, first I want to show you kind of what clarity and recovery does in a photograph. And I'm going to pick my dog's shadow because there's lots of blacks there and there's lots of snow. So I'm going to click on that, highlight it, go to my full editor. When I go to my full editor, it opens up the Camera Raw viewer. Now this is a pretty good photograph. I wouldn't probably change a whole lot except for I know that she's a black dog and maybe I want to, bring in some of the blacks a little bit more. So I might slide this up just to know that her black coat is going to be truly black. Just a little tiny bit like that. Now I've brought up the black values in this photograph. But the real reason why I wanted to bring this photograph up is so I could show you an example of, instead of trying to explain to you how recovery and what it means, because I'm going to show you how it can help the final image, but I want to show you how it looks, what recovery does, and what clarity does on a fairly good photograph. So I'm going to first use this recovery tool. But as I'm sliding the bar, I want you to watch what happens to the snow up here as I'm sliding the recovery up. So here goes. I'm going to start sliding it up kind of slowly. And as I start getting to the higher end, you'll notice that it almost looks like it's darker. What it's doing is it's recovering the values, and now we've got like small shadows that it's recovering so that we've got more detail in the snow. So we're recovering lost, what I'm trying to say, we're recovering lost detail in the snow. Now if I slide this all the way back and turn the recovery completely off, now you see we've gotten areas where there's not much information there. Same with the clarity. This clarity, if I bring it all the way up, you see we've got some darker, almost more contrast area, but we've really recovered the information in the snow. And when I drop down the clarity, it almost looks fuzzy. We've lost so much of that value in the snow. So that is what clarity and recovery does. And let me show you how it affects an image that's got a lot of things that need to be fixed on it. So close this one. I'm going to go back to my organizer. I'm going to grab a shot that I took the other night when I was in Oak Harbor. I just finished teaching a class, and I had all this energy, and I had my camera with me, so I thought, you know what, there's a little bit of fog. I'm going to try taking some pictures. And as you can see, all of these pictures here were taken at night. And the one thing you can say about them is they look kind of reddish and not very appetizing, not very interesting. So I'm going to grab this photograph here I'm going to go to my full editor. And now I've got my full editor up. And one thing I noticed is that I've got some areas that are completely washed out. I'm going to take care of that in a minute. But look at this, this histogram. There just isn't anything, there isn't a whole lot of color there. There's not a lot of exposure. It's very dark. So I'm going to first, I'm going to make it so that it's fun to look at or get some color back. So I'm going to change the color temperature. Now, I know that I don't want to make it warmer, and if you look at this chart, you'll see if I slide it this way, I'm going to make it more yellow. Don't want to do that. What I want to do is cool it off, make it bluer. So I've got some room, so I'm going to start sliding this to a little bit bluer value. And as I start sliding, notice how the greens are starting to come out on the tree. Now, look at that. I've got a blue sky and a nice kind of green tree. And I can move the tint a little bit. Maybe make it a little bit greener. Yeah, maybe make it a little bit redder. And, you know, I can just play with this until I like it. Now, it is kind of dark. We see this. But in a case like this, I want it to be slightly dark. I don't want it to be all white because it's night. I want people to understand that this is a night shot. But I might want to lighten it up a little bit just to bring out some more color and some more of this blue in this area. And, you know, blacks, I'm getting, what I want is, I know that we're going from light here to dark. And this area looks like it's not quite black after I've moved the exposure up. So I want to make sure that I've got that transition. I don't want to do a whole lot, you know, just a little bit. I want to add some blacks there. Now, you know, brightness, maybe I want to brighten it up just a little bit so I can get some of that blue in there. Contrast, do I want to make it flatter? Will that make it more interesting? Probably not, because what I want on this picture is to go from really black to really blue. So I probably, instead of wanting to make it flatter, I probably want to make it a little bit more punchy, bring the contrast up a little bit. And saturation. You know, do I want really good saturated colors? You know, we're starting to get back into that yellowish color again. Or do I want it to be a little bit less saturated so we can see, you know, just a little bit of contrast there. Now, recovery. Now, with these kind of shots, even without being able to really see what's going on with night shots, I know that the recovery and clarity, I want to bring those way up just to cause the picture to really pop out and print well. I still have a few, and it's hardly worth worrying about, but I've got two little spots here, three, I guess, that are indicating that they're going to be blown out if I ever print that. So there'll be three little spots. So let's see if I can bring that recovery all the way up and get rid of them. Clarity. It looks like the only way I'm going to do it is to change my exposure and bring it down just a little bit. Now, do I want to lose that much information just for those three little spots? I probably don't, so I'm going to bring it back up. So the other thing about photography is it's also about compromise. You've got these tools here, but you know, sometimes you can't have the absolute most perfect picture. But I think this is pretty dramatic difference from where we started with that yellow print. And now I could take it into my photo editing software, and maybe try adjusting the levels a little bit, and maybe bringing out some more detail or getting rid of those real highlights. So that is a demonstration of some of the stuff that you can do using Camera Raw, and it's why photographers love Camera Raw because it gives you so much more control over an image. And like I tell my students in my photography classes, my camera classes, there's one thing I can tell you about photographers is that we're all control freaks, and having Camera Raw really really satisfies us in our ability to control the scene. So that is Camera Raw.
Then I want to show everyone how they can use Camera Raw, whether or not they have a big fancy digital SLR or just a tiny pocket point and shoot. What you need to do is go to www.adobe.com/downloads, and you'll see down here it says Camera Raw 5.2 update for Windows or for Mac. If you have, pick the, you know what you have. Pick the right computer, and it will take you to a page that you can download this Camera Raw plugin. It'll show you which cameras it works for, README stuff, blah, 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 lots of that. What's important is that you look at the system information and make sure that your version of Elements is listed. So this latest plugin works with 6 or 7. If that's not what you have to download an earlier version. This is version 5.2. It can be really hard to find these on Adobe, so it's much better to go up to Google and Google your version of, we'll do that in just a second, your version. Before I leave this page, I want to make sure you look at the installation instructions and look for your version of Elements. There's all kinds of installation instructions here. What you want to do is find the one that says to install with Adobe Photoshop Elements and follow these instructions exactly. All you're going to do is download this file, save it on your desktop, put it in a folder inside of Elements, rename your old one first, then you copy this one in, and it'll be available to you. It's actually very simple, but if you don't put it in the right folder, it doesn't work at all. So you might want to copy these instructions or print them out and then install it. Make sure you have Photoshop Elements. They also show Premiere Elements, which is the movie editing software. You have Photoshop Elements. If you don't have Elements 6 or 7, you can't use 5.2. Like I have right here, I have Elements 5 on my computer, so I'm using an earlier version of this. And you can find it on Adobe if you're willing to spend a lot of time, but it's a lot easier to just go into Google and put in your version of Elements and search for it, and you'll get the download link a lot faster that way. Adobe Elements Camera Raw 4.0. You can spend hours looking around Adobe trying to find the right version, and it's not helpful. So if you don't have this latest version, don't go to Adobe. Go to Google Adobe Camera Raw and Elements with your correct version number, and that will take you to the download that you actually want. Just, click on it, and there it is. You don't want 5.2, you want to go down and make sure you do the Camera Raw update for 5 or 6, 5, 4, and 5. That page gives you everything, and it's a lot easier. Click on Camera Raw update. Do the same thing, scroll down and check the system requirements. Is it your version, 5 or 6, or do you have 4? If you have the wrong version, just go back and keep going until you find the one you want. If you have Adobe 4 and 5, then you might be better off with this version. So download it, plug it in, and then you'll be able to do this. Here we are in Photoshop Elements. Now I have the plugin enabled, so you can go to File. You don't open, you open as. And when you get into your Photoshop Elements, you find it'll open JPEGs or TIFF files in Camera Raw. So you go to a JPEG, you're in Open As, you pick a JPEG. Now this next part is the critical part. You click on the file type, you open as Camera Raw. Make sure it's Camera Raw. That's the Adobe plugin for Camera Raw. You might see some other RAW stuff on here. Well, that sounded weird. You might see some other RAW formats on here, but you want Camera Raw, which is your Adobe plugin. You've used Open As, not just Open. And then when you open it, instead of opening in the editor, it's going to open in that Camera Raw editor Cindy just showed us, and you'll have access to this clarity and vibrance and the recovery tools that work so well in upping the midtones and just bringing out the saturation in the midtones without bringing out, you can see the difference in saturating the whole thing, turned it all a color. Just saturating the midtones just makes everything pop. And it gives you a whole lot of different controls that you don't have in the full editor. So you can do that, and then when you click Open Image, it'll bring it into the editor. And afterwards, anytime you open this image again, you don't have to, let's close it, you don't have to next time open it with Camera Raw and all that selection. If you go back and you open it now, it should open, no, it's just opening in the editor. You have to save your changes, which I didn't do. But after that, it'll open in the Camera Raw editor. If you want to open a different photo, it's always Open As, change to RAW, say OK, and you'll get all those cool new tools that you can use to make super selections and extra nice ways of changing your photos, even without having the Camera Raw photo editor, the photo format on your camera.